Hello everyone, my name is Boulevard, your favorite Legends of Runeterra caster. Yeah, that wasn't a matter of opinion, I'm your favorite now. I usually focus on tournament stuff because I don't care about ladder, though with the new LP system changes to the Master Ladder, I'm definitely inclined to play it a bit more. If you've watched me before, I've mentioned a few times that I used to do balance work for 2 trading card games, and Riot has, up until this point, usually fallen pretty closely in line with my own balance philosophies. This time they went for a buff everything approach over nerf the strongest thing, although they did manage to unexpectedly nerf some of the worst cards in the game. And I've never been a fan of the buff everything without, let me explain. So, as I said, fuck ladder. It's stupid and I hate it. I like tournaments where gladiators get to duke it out and I get to yell at them to an audience. But I digress. I had a long-winded setup where I'd go through a lot of deck tracking websites and whatnot and show you how high the stats on Heimerdingers are and then rationalize that these buffs aren't going to bring anything close to that power level. It's much easier to bring decks down than bring them up, and when you're doing buffs like this, you don't necessarily have a specific deck in mind, but hope the community will find a use for the newly buffed cards in a meaningful way, and then it will blanket increase the power enough to solve the problem. But I want you to look me in the eye, Jonathan Riot, and tell me which of these buffs specifically impact my win percentage against Heimerdingers. And you may be wondering, why is he going so hard on Heimerdingers and not Endure Spiders? Well, it's because Elise paid me off, not to mention, because Endure and Cursed Keeper got nerfed. And the reason I keep bringing up my disdain for ladder and my love of tournaments is because it skews my view on the playability of things as well as their power levels. For example, Heimerdingers has been an extremely dominant tournament deck throughout patch 1.2, though through the lens of a ladder player, it could definitely seem like I'm overstating things. Anyway, let's actually talk about the patch notes. Darius is as straightforward as a champion gets on their level up ability. In fact, he is too straightforward, but this change is actually super impactful as Darius has finally decided to stop hiding his true self, and now that he is a 6 mana 10/6, he is more easily identified as 2 Sennas stacked on top of each other in a trench coat. Anivia going from 7 to 6 is certainly a step in the right direction, though I don't think it's necessarily enough. She's probably one of the biggest victims of the Rising Tide's power creep, and I think it'll be some time before we see her come back in any meaningful way. Vlad and Brahm have parted ways since Bilgewater came to Runeterra, and Brahm, being a loyal friend, has been patiently waiting for Vladimir's return. But he's been waiting so long that more Poros have begun to flock to him, so he's had to work out more to be able to hug them all at the same time like they deserve. This has given him some more attack, which has always been the biggest weakness of Brahm. He was a card you had to commit resources to in order to be impactful, and he gained no value inherently until he leveled, and even then, with 0 attack, he wasn't going to take over a game in a meaningful way. So after 2 months off of working on himself, Brahm is back on the market as Runeterra's most eligible Bachelor. This is like the definition of a quality of life change. It doesn't impact how you build a deck at all, it just makes the decks that already use it feel better. Mogwai's Casino deck is really the only Jinx deck that we're seeing on a regular basis, but it's more of a fun deck than a super competitive one, so I don't think it's going to pop up in the tournament scene, and quality of life changes rarely ever impact that. However, on ladder, this should help it gain a few percentage points in the W column. I'm definitely a little surprised to see this aggressive of a buff onto Genevieve, and I call it aggressive because a small buff would have been simply making her ability affect herself like Bannerman used to do, though it seems they're trying to cut that identity out of Demacia since neither Bannerman nor Cythria do it, and instead went for a raw stat change, which is obviously better. Since she's the second scout to get buffed up to a 5/5, I am patiently waiting for one of you to make a Trifarian Assessor scout deck. I've always been a fan of Genevieve Elmhart, who with this buff secures her place at the top of my heart. I was worried that if everything at the top was nerfed, then Unyielding Spirit would become a problem, but it looks like Heimerdinger has finally initiated a hostile takeover of Riot Games and decided to gut the card without the meta around it coming down to its level. You can now kill a unit in response to Unyielding Spirit, much like how Professor Cecil B. Heimerdinger killed Jonathan Riot in response to a proposal of denuclearization of Piltover and Zon. Vengeance, it would seem, is the answer for more than one thing. He might look a little tougher than he used to, but make no mistake about it, Basilisk Riders are the horse girls of the Noxian Legion, and you should still avoid interacting with them at all costs. Captain Ferran has finally finished Night School, and instead of being the tough guy whose job it was to seize all of your assets and replace them with Noxian propaganda, he is pursuing his dreams and moved over to the finance sector, where he is now in charge of handing out stimulus packages. He's still a little new to giving without taking, so we'll monitor his behavior and get back to you, but he's certainly got more promise than he did in his old role. I don't have anything funny to say because Aurora Borealis is a soul-sucking pun in of itself, and I think it needs to just cast the Poro snacks for you if it is ever going to be competitively viable, but competitive viability is not what it was designed for, so I don't really care. That goes for you too, Poro Herder. Freljord was one of the most dominant regions during the early access weekends in 2019, and since then most of the cards have been nerfed heavily and then power crept, and this patch seeks to restore some of that power and regional identity. The goal is to get players playing more Freljord heavy decks instead of small splashes like Pilfer and Endure, and giving She Who Wanders extra survivability is a great step back to the glory days of Warmother's Call. Below her, we see They Who Endure getting absolutely fucking wrecked for being a dirty Shadow Isle apologist, proving all Eldritch beings are not created equal. On a more serious note, I think She Who Wanders was actually a good card pre-Rising Tides, so I'm excited to experiment with the more resilient version, though I am worried her mana cost is still too high to take advantage of her fully, especially with things like sea monsters getting out of her range around turn 7, and on the Endure note, Endure Spiders are likely still fine. I really liked old Ren Shadowblade conceptually, and I think a redesign was actually pretty smart if you're going to buff a lot of Freljord cards, which feels like a push toward trying to get Warmother's Call back into the meta, which was arguably Ren Shadowblade's best fit. The long-standing problem with ephemeral decks is that all of your units are inherently -1s, making it pretty easy to run out of cards. Every non-ephemeral unit in your deck had to be guarded heavily, as they let you squeak as much value out of your ephemerals as possible, but they usually needed to stick around to do so. While I'm admittedly not a big fan of the new Ren Shadowblade, I think it's a step in the right direction design-wise for what you want ephemeral to look like. Unlike Poros, this doesn't feel like a goofy concept you never wanted to see the light of competitive play, so I like the idea of units who create ephemerals, especially strong cheap ones, and have an inherent amount of protection, which is what I consider Quick Attack to be. I'm not sure this is enough to get ephemerals into tier 1 or even tier 2, but I think they're getting really close. When Riot asked us what epics we thought could use an overhaul, a lot of people were excited to see what would become of Jayma Darda, and in no unclear terms I am very, very disappointed. While Ren Shadowblade went from cool control top end to potential ephemeral carry, Jay went from a little confusing and unplayable to fucking nowhere. He's still a little confusing and unplayable. In what universe is this a card you build your deck around? What are you talking about? Are we looking at the same card? This is a 6-mana 4/4 who has to survive to draw a card. Not sure why that was a necessary stipulation. I feel like it would have been better off if he just drew a card on enter. He's worded like a standalone hunk and costed like a beer at a concert. I guess the dream is to fire off a bunch of Vault Breakers onto him, but without any inherent protection for himself, and with Piltover not offering much to defend him either, he's either still unplayable, or some guy with a 15-foot whiteboard in his room and a potential Adderall addiction just found the new Piltover Ionia deck of the format. I didn't touch on Cursed Keeper at all in my patch prediction video, and then a couple of days later, after a few hours of laddering, all I could think of was how to nerf Cursed Keeper. It's a little strange to me that they didn't take the Badger Bear approach and make him a 3/4, but I think they might be trying to make a push for the return of things like Grasp of the Undying. It's a quality of life change, there's really not much to say about it. The cost reduction on the Harrowing might be one of the biggest buffs in the patch. Not only can you now play Deny in the same turn as this, but being able to play it on turn 6 instead of 7 entices you to run more copies, as you can just fire them off willy-nilly turns 6, 8, and 10 if you have the attack token, whereas previously you could only do it on turns 8 and 10 in the same order. Chaining them together feels better, and with the Freljord buffs, I think the return of Ash Harrowing may be a possibility. While nab decks are a concern, since you can no longer revive your opponent's units with the Harrowing, it shouldn't be that big of a problem. This card was originally the finisher for Spooky Karma, which has made a resurgence, but since it made a resurgence without the Harrowing, a buff makes sense since the one deck you thought would be playing it isn't. These are both pretty simple quality of life changes, they should still see the same amount of play that they currently do. This feels like a little bit more than a quality of life change, as I actually do think this will affect the play rate of Petty Officer, who felt like he was in an okay position before, and while I don't think it's necessarily going to push barrel control decks to the forefront of the meta, I think that we might see him pop up a little bit more in Pilfer decks. In my patch prediction video, I had mentioned 4 nerfs or reworks I really wanted to see: Pilfer, Ezreal, Heimerdinger, and Endure. While I got Endure and technically Pilfer, this feels more like a quality of life change than an actual nerf. Since Pilfered Goods' burst speed, it doesn't matter a whole lot if I can remove Merchant easier. The package is still too cost and tempo efficient, which was the complaint I had heard the most often from other players and the one I had myself, and this does nothing to solve it. It only solves unintended Omen Hawk interactions which, while unfortunate, didn't stop anyone from playing Omen Hawk. Missing out on Ezreal and Heimerdinger nerfs sucks more for tournament players than ladder players to a degree, but I don't think anyone is super happy about keeping them at their current power level. They also did away with the watch list from what I can see, which means I can't yell at the Void in 4 weeks about how a card got watch listed and was still a problem and then got unwatch listed for some reason. This is also the section where they would usually present their reasoning for not nerfing something like Heimerdinger, and in its absence I am left with confusion, neglect, and mostly rage. Also, in the Miscellaneous section, they said Teemo's level up effects were polished, and I hope that means entirely fucking reworked, because that is the most underwhelming champion level up I have ever seen in my entire life. That is going to do it for me though. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, which I am legally obligated to say at the end of a YouTube video. A lot of you have been forgetting to do a couple of those things. But also I am a Legends of Runeterra caster, and I work with a lot of the major tournaments, Jamfest, Duels of Runeterra, things of that nature. So follow me on Twitter if you want to find out when and where I'm casting each weekend, as it does kind of change. It's not always hosted on my Twitch channel, sometimes it's on others. But anyway, that is the end of the video. My name is Boulevard. I sincerely hope that you had a good time, and I look forward to casting tournaments this weekend. Duels of Runeterra is coming up. They have finalized their formats if you guys want to check that out over on the Discord. I haven't made a new video about them finalizing their formats, but NA is going to be going with their proposed format, and EU is going to be going with the Ruben Zoo proposed format, which you can find a little bit more information about either in their Discord or in my older announcement video of the Duels of Runeterra format. But here I go rambling at the end of a patch prediction. Most of you aren't here as subscribers, you're just here as people that like to watch patch predictions, so I'm going to end the video right now.